There's a common myth, especially in the US and Canada, that the solution to traffic is to build more highways and add more lanes. At first, it seems logical. A road is full of cars, so just make it bigger. But when your city has 18-lane or even 26-lane highways that still get jammed with traffic, maybe it's not so simple.
Toronto has one of the worst commutes in the world.
Los Angeles once again takes top honors for the most gridlocked city in the world.
All right, I've made movies at Toronto, and I've visited Toronto, I have friends in Toronto.
Yeah.
What's up with the traffic in Toronto?
Transportation is based on people's behavior. Every day, millions of people make independent decisions on how they travel. Am I gonna drive or take the subway? Should I leave earlier to beat the traffic or take a different route? People also make big lifestyle choices like where they live, work, and shop based on how they get around. When people move into a new neighborhood, they plan their lives around the best mode of transportation. If it's driving, they'll save up for a new car, and if it's transit, they'll buy a monthly pass. So when a new lane or a new highway is built, those who once avoided driving because of the traffic are now able to do so. Those who took a different route might switch to the new road because of all the new space. Others who left earlier to beat the traffic now change their schedules. This is called latent demand, which is demand that already exists but is limited by the capacity. But in the long term, a new road will also generate new traffic that didn't exist before. This is called induced demand or induced traffic. A new road will allow people to find a new home or a job that's further away because they can now drive there faster. Others will simply drive more than they did before because it's now cheaper. But the biggest driving factor, pun intended, is when a new road encourages car-centric sprawl, meaning new suburbs, strip malls, and parking lots are built alongside it. So as the city grows and more people move into these car-centric places, they will plan their lives around driving, adding more cars to the road and inducing even more demand. This is how you get Highway 401, the busiest highway in the world, carrying over 400,000 cars per day on average. The history of Highway 401 is just like any other highway in North America. A small road was congested with traffic, so they widened it. When that filled up, they widened it even more. And when that filled up with traffic, you're not gonna believe this, but they widened it again. And this went on and on and on and on and on and on, and on and on and on and on and on and on, until we ended up with this 18-lane monstrosity. Oh, and traffic still wasn't fixed. When you widen or build new roads, traffic might improve initially, but in the long term, it'll be just as bad, if not worse than before. Trying to fix traffic by adding more capacity is like trying to fix obesity by loosening your belt. So, I guess we're all just doomed. Stuck in traffic forever. Is this the meaning of life? Is this our true purpose? Perhaps the real destinations were the friends we made along the way. Okay, whoa, don't get all sad just yet. Because induced demand doesn't just apply to cars. It applies to every mode of transportation, whether it's walking, cycling, or public transit. You might have heard the phrase, build it and they will come, meaning when you make any type of transportation good, people who once didn't use it will use it, no matter if it's roads, bike lanes, subways, or sidewalks. A 2015 study by Leah et al. Found that after Toronto installed protected bike lanes on a section of Bloor Street, the number of people cycling more than doubled from 7 to 18%. That's actually more than the number of people who drive. The difference is, not all modes of transportation are created equal. This chart from the National Association of City Transportation Officials shows approximately how many people each mode of transportation moves per hour. Cars are the least efficient mode of transportation. You need a ridiculous amount of space to move the same number of people as you would with, say, a subway line. Inducing demand for cars also comes with negative health and environmental consequences like air and noise pollution, not to mention the danger cars pose to anyone outside a vehicle, especially with the rise of giant trucks and SUVs.
You see Hoover Street here, officials say it's one of the most dangerous streets in all of Los Angeles, and now
the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto is a great example of this. Not only does it produce tons of noise and air pollution, it also dumps tons of cars into the city, meaning surrounding streets have to be built to handle all the traffic. But unlike the suburbs, the majority of downtown residents don't drive, they either walk, cycle, or take transit. Yet the safety of people walking and the viability of public transit have to be sacrificed to serve people who commute from the suburbs. For example, this intersection beside the Gardner used to not have a crosswalk, and a 2015 city report denied adding one because it would have, quote, significant negative impacts, which is just their way of saying it would slow down drivers by a minute or two. Thankfully, they did end up adding one sometime during the pandemic. On the flip side, a busy metro or train station can make the surrounding area significantly better by turning it into a central commercial hub for the city. Trains don't have the same pollution, size, or safety issues as cars, so the surrounding area can be a lively, people-oriented environment. Bike lanes can achieve this as well. Lei et al. Study showed that 90% of shop patrons on Toronto's Bloor Street arrive by walking, cycling, and transit, not by driving. So when the city installed the protected bike lanes and removed car parking, customer sales went up. Because by reducing car traffic, you turn a street into a place worth visiting and not just a place you drive through. So comparing all the pros and cons between cars and other modes of transportation, we can choose what kind of demand we want to induce. Do we want to build more highways and suburbs and induce more driving? Or do we want to build more transit-oriented, walkable neighborhoods and induce more active transportation? A common justification for building highways, especially among traffic engineers, is that the population is growing and so we need more roads to accommodate all the future traffic. Now, aside from all these traffic projections being wrong, this assumes that people have to drive by default, as if car dependency is the only option. More people doesn't have to mean more cars. People choose cars because there's no other viable alternative. The Greater Toronto Area is expected to grow to over 10 million people by 2046, but we have a choice. All those extra millions of people can either live in car-dependent suburbs on the edge of the city and drive everywhere, or they can live in denser, walkable neighborhoods and have access to good public transit. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be completely one way or the other, and that's the point. People should get to choose how they want to live. But currently, due to zoning laws and parking requirements, car-dependent suburbs are pretty much the only thing we can legally build. In the province of Ontario, 175 acres of land are paved over each day for new car-dependent suburbs. And the corrupt premier recently tried to sell off protected farmland for more suburban development.
It was a mistake to open the Greenbelt.
And is currently planning to destroy farmland to build a new highway.
I know that you don't want to be trapped in gridlock for hours during your daily commute.
These are choices. Car-dependent sprawl is not inevitable just because the country is big. If we actually want to be serious about improving traffic, we have to choose to make the alternatives better. A great example is North York Centre in Toronto. Back in the late 70s, this was your typical car-centered suburban commercial strip. But in the 80s, a new subway station was added along with high-density mixed-use developments. As a result, car ownership and car usage had decreased by 16 and 17%, and subway ridership increased by 84%. Today, North York Centre is a very lively and attractive destination rather than a forgettable car-centered wasteland. Although the Strode is still way too wide and we really need to reduce the amount of lanes here. This is why we need to address land use. We need to bring people and their destinations closer together so people have jobs and stores near their homes instead of having to drive across the city. The land around a transit station is especially important because this is the area where transit users can easily walk or cycle to without having to drive or take a bus to their final destination. This is the key to building good transit, and it's the biggest reason why transit in North America often fails. Here's a typical train station in Canada's largest city. It's surrounded by nothing but parking lots. Without enough people around to use it, transit will always be suffering from low ridership. But that doesn't paint the full picture. This video by Ode the Urbanity shows that in many suburbs across North America, most people actually live within a bikeable distance of various amenities. In the US, more than half of all trips people make are 5 miles or less. That's 8 kilometers. Despite this, the majority of people still drive because the streets are hostile to anyone outside of vehicles, so no one feels safe walking or cycling. So we need to implement more road diets, curb extensions, protected intersections, and separated bike lanes so people have an alternative to driving for shorter trips. Now, it would be easy to just say that we need more public transit and bike lanes and traffic will be solved forever. But while that will take cars off the road, what we learned about induced demand is that all that empty space will just get filled up again by more traffic. So on top of better transportation options, we need a congestion charge, or tolls on roads going into the city. The idea is simple. Drivers entering downtown, especially during peak hours, have to pay a small fee. This should not be a new concept. Many transit systems like the London Underground charge riders extra for riding during peak times. Currently, the majority of people who commute downtown from Toronto suburbs already take public transit. And even more people can take public transit if they are incentivized to do so. This not only means that the minority of commuters are causing all this traffic, but it also means that congestion pricing or tolls can work very effectively in Toronto even if we don't build any new public transit, which, to be clear, we should. And if it can work in Toronto, it most definitely can work in New York City. As long as someone doesn't ruin it.
I have come to the difficult decision that implementing the planned congestion pricing system risks too many unintended consequences for New Yorkers at this.
But the ideal solution is to remove highways altogether. There's a well-studied phenomenon called traffic evaporation, where removing roads just makes traffic disappear. When San Francisco's Embarcadero Freeway was destroyed in 1989, traffic literally just went away, and it was replaced by a nice boulevard. The same thing happened when Portland's Harbor Drive, New York's West Side Highway, and Seattle's Alaskan Freeway were torn down. People simply switched to other modes of transportation, worked from home, or changed how they travel altogether. There are dozens of examples like this all around the world, but probably the best is the Cheonggyecheon Freeway in Seoul. Back in 2005, the city replaced this highway with an amazing river park, and traffic decreased by 45%. Not to mention all these significant benefits it had on the environment and quality of life. Now, removing highways won't work everywhere, but it should definitely be considered in a dense city like downtown Toronto. I guarantee the Gardiner Expressway is not as important as people think it is, because once it's actually gone, you would never had imagined a highway once being there. Often when I talk about reducing car dependencies, someone will inevitably bring up a war on cars or an anti-car movement. This is hilarious because cars are still disproportionately prioritized over everything else. There's very little traffic enforcement, cheap parking everywhere, and miles of highways that cost nothing to use. Recently, there has been construction on Toronto's Gardiner Expressway, causing major traffic delays to over 100,000 drivers each day. And so it gets constant media coverage, and over $70 million is being spent so that construction finishes sooner. All for just 2 lanes of highway. Meanwhile, the Toronto subway, which moves over 1 million people per day, that's 10 times more than the Gardiner, has been facing slow zones all throughout the system due to track maintenance. Yet it gets no attention or funding at all. It's very clear what our actual priorities are when we do whatever it takes to speed up car traffic in the center of the city while leaving our transit system to rot. When you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And when drivers are used to being able to drive anywhere while paying only a fraction of the price for the space they take up, limiting cars in any way feels like an attack on people's freedom. That bike lanes and trains impede on their ability to drive. But cars are inherently unsustainable. They take up a ton of space, and even when 90% of our streets are dedicated to them, it's still never enough. So in a growing city where traffic is spiraling out of control, cities need to give other modes of transportation their fair share. You yourself can help by going out and voting for people that don't ignore basic economics. Also, find a local advocacy group in your city that's working to improve public transit and stop highway expansions. I'll link some in the description. Hopefully, as transit, walkability, and bike infrastructure steadily improves over time, future generations won't be so trapped in this car-centric mindset.